Good evening and welcome to the October 18th meeting of the Los Gatos Town Council. Good time to turn off your cell phone or put it on to vibrate. And if we could have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Mike Wasserman.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Rice.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Vice Mayor Joe Pazinski.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Diane McNutt.
Here. We begin each council meeting with the Future Leaders Program, and this is an opportunity for us to honor and identify a young person in our community who is already showing great signs of leadership. So we have with us tonight Crystal Huang, who's a 7th grade student at Fisher Middle School. So Crystal, why don't you come on up while I tell people a little bit about you. Crystal was selected to attend the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth 2010 residential summer camp at Stanford University, which is a pretty prestigious honor, I believe. She was chosen as valedictorian at graduation in 5th grade. She was student council member at Louise Van Meter Elementary School in 3rd grade. She's the first violinist of the string group at Fisher Middle School in 6th grade. She plays piano and violin, loves the performing arts, helps out in classrooms at Van Meter on Mondays, and volunteers at various events, such as accompanying the piano for the Children's Choir for a Cure in 2010. She likes swimming, volleyball, track, and field, and this talented young lady is going to help us tonight do the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
An applause for Crystal, please.
Thank you.
Here's your little gift.
Thank you.
Next this evening, we have a very special opportunity to honor some residents in our community who have given us great public service. And these are the members of our General Plan Advisory Committee group. I'm going to ask all of council to come down and join me in honoring these folks. So let me call them by name, and we'll see if these match up with the way I pull them out. And then I will tell you what each of these commendations says after we get the full group up here. So first we have John Bourgeois. Oh, it worked. We would do all of the big applause at the end. There's John. And Barbara Cardillo, I do not see. James Foley is not here. Melanie Hansen. And Perry Herreri, and Marcia Jensen, and Libby Lane, and Tim Lindell, and Tom O'Donnell. And, oh, what's his name here? Joe, something with a P, Krasinski? That would be, okay. And Dan Ross. And Chuck Sloan. And Barbara Spector. How about that? And Tom Spilsbury. And then I think we also do not have with us tonight Jane Ogle, Deborah Weinstein, and Gordon Yamati. So let me tell you, these folks have put in, as we just learned recently, well over 100 or 120 hours of their time in helping our community put together our general plan for the next decade. So this is setting the future of the town of Los Gatos for many, many years to come. Each of them is holding a commendation from the town council, and let me read you what it says. Whereas each of you was appointed to the General Plan Update Advisory Committee and has faithfully served from July 1st, 2008 to May 20th, 2010 as a member, which has brought distinction to yourself and credit to the committee. And whereas on the General Plan Update Advisory Committee, you served as a member at large, representing various geographic areas and community interests where you contributed your expertise. And whereas during your tenure, you assisted with advising town staff, providing a forum for public involvement, and making recommendations to the Planning Commission and Town Council on a limited update to the general plan that focused on environment and sustainability, recreation, parks, and open space, the needs of youth and seniors, and minor revisions of existing policies, goals, and implementation measures, resulting in the adoption of the 2020 general plan. And where each of you was a dedicated member of the committee who worked diligently to preserve the town's charm and small-town character, and whereas in all of the above endeavors you have shown unselfish public service for the protection of community values. Now, therefore, the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos does hereby render with special appreciation, commendation, and thanks to the General Plan Advisory Committee. Applause, please. Thank you so much. Who was the chair?
Jane.
Vice chair?
John Bourgeois.
John, would you like to, on behalf of the General Plan Advisory Committee, like to say just a couple of words about the experience?
Sure, nothing like putting me on the spot. I think I speak for everyone when I say it really was an honor to be a part of this committee. We all do this because we treasure this community and we want to preserve what we love about it and enhance what we don't. So I think on behalf of all of us, thank you to the town for allowing us to participate in this process, and it's all for the betterment of Los Gatos. So thank you.
So now I've been watching baseball, so we can do one of those things where you go down the line and pat the hands, and then we can all return to our seats, right? Okay. Give us just a minute, and we'll get back together here.
Mr. Rice? Mayor, go back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. There is no closed session report this evening.
You commend yourself. Okay, let's see where we are here. Okay, next we have council matters. Council, anything that you want to share? No? Go Giants, okay. Manager matters.
Yes. Mayor, members of the council, 3 items to report. First, last Tuesday, we had the 21st annual police recognition that was sponsored by the Los Gatos Montesarino Police Foundation. And at that annual recognition, we recognized Detective Kevin Elliott, Officer Leo Coddington, Resident Mike Batsford, our entire Volunteers in Policing program, as well as the Explorer Post program for their extraordinary service to the residents of Los Gatos. Second, this Friday is the deadline for residents to apply for our boards and commissions, and we're seeking community volunteers to serve in 20 vacancies on 9 different boards and commissions. And as we just saw with the recognition the mayor and council provided, that service is critically important to our community, and we heartily encourage residents to apply. Last, we are again providing a ballot box in the town clerk office for any absentee ballot voter that wishes to drop off a ballot during normal business hours up through Election Day, Tuesday, November 2nd. Thank you very much. Oh, we
And-
do have a did you know?
Okay.
Thank you. And the did you know?
Mr.
Oh,
Larson,
there's
wait a minute.
Sandy.
I believe there's a question from Councilmember Wasserman.
One addendum onto the town manager's report, if I may, about the police foundation. The bidding has started for the Thomas Kincaid piece, and they can go to what website, the public, to bid on the Thomas Kincaid piece with the proceeds going to the Los Gatos Montesino Police Foundation.
If you Google Los Gatos Montesino Police Foundation, that will take you right to the website.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, did you know?
Okay. Thank you, Greg, and Mayor McNutt and Council. Did you know that the town of Los Gatos has a commitment to and takes an active role in developing affordable housing in our community? Did you know that the town has a total of 335 affordable housing units? The town's affordable rental housing program has 295 rental units. 150 of these rental units are available to senior citizens. The town has a below-market price housing program that requires a percentage of all units in a construction project to be sold below the market rate. The town currently has 40 owner-occupied units under this program. The town participates in the Mortgage Credit Certificate Program, which reduces mortgage payments by providing a tax credit on federal personal income tax. The town also participates with the Housing Trust of Santa Clara County, which can allow first-time home buyers to receive a no-interest loan to assist in closing costs and other related home buying expenses. Since 1976, the town has offered grants and low-interest loans to income-eligible residents for home repairs through the town's Housing Conservation Program. And lastly, the town contracts with Project Sentinel to administer the town's tenant-landlord conflict resolution service. This service provides conciliation, mediation, and arbitration services for tenants and landlords when conflicts arise regarding rent, housing services, or proposed evictions. For further information about these programs and services, it's available on the town's website at www.losgatosca.gov/community service. Additional county housing programs and services are available at the county's website at www.sccgov.org. And that concludes my presentation, and we're going to learn more about housing later on tonight when we discuss the housing element.
Thank you so much. Done, Mr. Larson? Okay. Next on the agenda are consent items, and these are items that will be approved with one motion unless anyone on council wants to pull an item from consent. Does anyone in the public want to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Items 1 through 7 pass unanimously. Next, we have verbal communication, and this is an opportunity for anyone in the public to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda. I have one card so far. If you wanted to speak, please bring your card up. Meantime, Carol Gretzner, you have up to 3 minutes to tell us what's on your mind.
Good evening. Thank you. Actually, I'm here to represent a new business that's coming to town. Some of you have heard of it. It's called the Butter Paddle, and I happen to be the president of the EMQ Auxiliary. That's, for those of you who aren't sure, Eastfield Ming Kwong, which has a campus, of course, here in Los Gatos. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the Butter Paddle. First of all, it doesn't sell. It's not a food store. It's not a used clothing store. It is a store that sells fine gifts and home accessories. The auxiliary itself has been in existence since 1934, and it's always been in Saratoga. For 44 years now, the Butter Paddle has been in Saratoga, California. And this year, 2010, October 6th, we closed our doors in Saratoga, and we're now in the midst of getting our store together here at 33 North Santa Cruz. And we're having a gala opening, which the mayor's going to be at, I know. And I wanted to personally invite the council to come down to the Butter Paddle. I have here some invitations, and I hope that you can come down and support us, because we are a fundraising arm to the EMQ, along with the Happy Dragon and the Unicorn, which is in Almaden. But this has been a huge, I cannot tell you how huge of a step to move that store from Saratoga to Los Gatos. As I said, we've been in business for 44 years. We're very, a successful store, but business was just dwindling too much in Saratoga for us. And because of the lack of foot traffic, we are coming here hoping that lots of Los Gatos feet enter our doors. So I just wanted to let you know we're here. Let me give the invitations to the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we welcome you to town, and I believe your opening is going to be my 20th ribbon cutting, so kind of a momentous occasion there. So thank you very much for sharing that information. I have no other cards. Is there anyone else who wants to speak under verbal? If not, the bulk of the meeting tonight is going to be spent on a study session on our housing element, and we're going to take a 3.5-minute break right now while we rearrange chairs and invite the Planning Commission to join us up here on the dais. ready to reconvene our meeting? We're ready to reconvene our meeting, gentlemen? Yes? Okay. We need to begin, I understand, with roll call of the Planning Commission who have joined us here on the dais.
Joanne Talasfor. Here. Philip Machichi.
Here.
John Bourgeois.
Here.
Mariko Sayek.
Here.
Thomas O'Donnell.
Here.
Marcia Jensen.
Here.
And Charles Erickson.
Here.
Thank you very much. This is an extraordinary session. This is a study session for both Planning Commission and Town Council in preparation for the housing element that will be coming forward to each of our bodies in the next few weeks. Staff is sure to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our purpose tonight is to, we've already read through the extensive draft and staff report. We're going to have additional briefing from staff to make sure that we understand all of the issues. It'll be an opportunity to ask any overarching questions that might need clarification, and also to request any additional information that you feel you might need as the housing element comes forward for consideration. It is not an opportunity to go page by page through the draft. We will have that opportunity later to note wordsmithing or questions or suggestions for new policies or new actions, which I'm sure staff would be horrified to hear at this point. But really, it's just a prep session so that when we have our 2 additional public hearings, everything will go smoothly and we'll be able to finish this up before the end of the calendar year. So if you have no preliminary questions about the process, we will open with a presentation from staff. I will then ask you if you have any questions. We will open it for public comment, and then we will come back and finalize if you have any requests for additional information going forward. So seeing none, we'll go ahead and begin, and Wendy Rooney, our Director of Community Development, will be making the initial presentation.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how the volume is. Is that good? Okay, great. Good evening, Mayor McNutt, Chairman Bourgeois, Town Council members, Planning Commissioners, Town staff, and community members. We are extremely delighted to be here tonight to present to you the second draft of the, is it feedback? The second draft of the housing element. To make the most efficient use of our time tonight. I'm done. Should we just keep moving? Okay. To make the most efficient use of our time tonight, staff is recommending following the format that will be outlined on your presentation for you. As the mayor indicated, we'll do a brief 15-minute staff presentation. Then we'll open it up for council commission questions, then public comment, and then some more conversation with the Planning Commission and Council, answering questions. And most importantly, we're asking that prior to the October 27th Planning Commission meeting, that Council and Planning Commissioners contact staff for any of the following: seeking further clarification, providing a list of requested additional information, and identifying any further issues. This will allow us to make the most efficient use of our time, both tonight and also at our respective public hearings on the housing element. So, presentation overview. Over the next 15 minutes, staff will summarize key housing element background and key information. I'm not going to read through all this, but basically we'll cover our housing element, the benefits to having a compliant housing element, constraints to housing, residential site analysis, and summary and conclusions.
Sorry, can you wait just a moment? I think we're still fine-tuning the sound situation. And in fact, I'm wondering if, for your initial presentation, if it would work best to go to the podium.
I can do that.
And use that mic there. What do you think, Mr. Larson? Is that
Let's do that.
the sound?
We figured out our best guess is it's because of the proximity of the table mics to the speakers.
Give you okay?
And we can't change either very easily.
Okay. So I think for the longest presentation, which will be her initial opening, it might be best to be up there.
Is this on? Yes. Okay, so what is a housing element? Well, it's a mandatory element of the general plan, unlike many of the elements we looked at the last couple of months. There's 4 major components to it: a housing needs assessment, evaluation of constraints to housing, identification of residential sites that would be appropriate for housing, and a 5-year program strategy to address those needs. What are the housing goals, the housing element goals? It's to increase housing supply and mix, to provide infill, socioeconomic equity, and protect environmental resources. It's to integrate regional, or have an, interregional relationship between jobs and housing, and that's actually a new provision. It's required to be updated every 5 years. One might ask why we're in a 207 to a 214, and that's because it took a couple of years for the for ABAG and the state to come up with the state to come up with our regional housing needs. And then lastly, requires housing and community development review for certification. That's a state agency. Let's talk a little bit about the regional housing needs allocation. The regional housing needs allocation is a tool that the state uses to plan for growth. The regional housing needs allocation, or it's also known as RHNA, quantifies the need for housing within each region of the state. State housing law requires that each municipality must accommodate its fair share of the region's housing needs and provide a mix of housing for all income levels within that community. It's important to note that the fair share allocations are planning targets. They're not quotas. In other words, municipalities must plan for housing. They do not need to construct it, but they must plan for it and remove constraints and make sure there's appropriate infrastructure. And taking a look at our regional housing needs allocation for the town of Los Gatos, I'm just going to go really to the total section. For this period of 2007 to 2014, there are 562 units that are required. We have constructed 41 of those over the last couple of years. That leaves a remaining RHNA of 521 units. So moving to key housing element law requirements. As your staff report notes, the state law requires communities to plan for their fair share of regional housing production, preserve affordable units that are already within the town, ensure that the review process facilitates the approval of affordable housing projects, allow development of multifamily housing as a use by right rather than through a discretionary review such as a use permit, and finally remove local government constraints to affordable housing. There's some new legislative and statutory requirements affecting housing elements in this cycle. These include incorporating provisions for homeless shelters, transitional and supportive housing, identifying and addressing the needs of extremely low-income households, providing significant more detail in the housing sites inventory, identifying and addressing constraints on housing for persons with disabilities, and finally, integration of the RHNA with transportation planning. So in this next cycle, you'll see that those two are joined. So what are the benefits to having a certified housing element? Probably the most important benefit is that you then have a presumption of a legally adequate housing element. It protects the jurisdiction in case it's sued for problems with their housing element or problems with being able to accommodate affordable housing. In other words, if you don't have a certified element and the court invalidates your housing element, the town could lose its ability to issue building permits and grant discretionary actions. That's a pretty extreme measure, but that has happened. It also helps us in being able to seek out mostly state and some federal grant monies. There's actually 9 grant programs available to municipalities that have a certified housing element. I want to quickly go through the demographics that are presented in our housing element. It's not surprising that Los Gatos population is aging, just like pretty much everywhere else in the country. The median age is 45 years, and that's up from 30 in 1970. Countywide, it's 36.6 years. Between 2002 and 2008, the town continues to have a slow and stable housing growth. Over that period of time, approximately a 5.4% growth rate, and that's compared to countywide at 6.6%. We've had stable housing tenure and mix. We still maintain about 65% owner-occupied, 35% renter-occupied. Countywide owner-occupied is 59.8%. 70% of our units are single-family, 22% are multifamily, meaning 5 units or more, and 8% are 2 to 4 unit homes as well as mobile homes. Our housing stock is in relatively good condition, and there's very few areas that require rehabilitation or reconstruction. Let's focus on one of our targeted populations, and that's our growing senior population. In 1970, 11% of the population in Los Gatos was 65 years of age or older, and in 2008, this has grown to 17%. In 2008, 24% of all households had at least one or more seniors. 78% of all seniors are homeowners. Interesting, though, seniors often need a wide variety of housing needs to accommodate, as they grow older, their accessibility and health care needs that may end up causing them to have to leave their homes that they've been in for many years. So we have to plan for a variety of housing types for them. In addition to our senior population, other town special needs include persons with disabilities. There's approximately 1,776 persons, or 6.7% of the population, that are considered disabled. It makes it very challenging when their income, typically their disability income, runs from $800 to $900 per month. Our extremely low-income households, we have approximately 900 extremely low households, or 7.5% of the entire household population. Single parents, that's also considered a special population because it's much more challenging to provide for family housing as a single parent. We have 611 households that are single parents, or approximately 5%. And finally, our homeless population is small but important. We have roughly 30 individuals that are homeless in our community. Another factor affecting the housing projection for this next coming cycle is our jobs to housing balance. An ideal job to housing balance is 1 to 1.5 jobs per household. What this means is there's perceived to be enough jobs within the community to support those that live in the community, and theoretically you don't have to commute out of the community. In 2008, the town had a healthy balance between the 18,650 jobs and roughly 12,170 units, equaled 1.5 jobs per household. By 2020, ABAG is projecting our jobs to grow faster than our housing units. That will result in 1.6 jobs per household. And this results in a potential increase in the demand for housing to accommodate the additional jobs. Just to give you an idea of these populations, these household incomes, this shows the number of households in our extremely low, very low, low, and moderate levels, as well as the percentage. Let's look at town housing cost as another factor. As not a surprise to anyone in this room, housing costs have been increasing significantly. In Los Gatos, we are tied for second highest median income home price in the county, and this was in 2008. In terms of the Los Gatos rental market, apartments, for a one-bedroom apartment, you're looking at roughly $1,447 per month. For a two-bedroom, $2,200 per month. Condos, roughly $2,100 per month for a three-bedroom. The reason for that discrepancy is because most of our condos are older. Our apartments tend to be of newer and command higher rents. We have roughly a 3.1% vacancy rate. The renter affordability gap, meaning the gap between what a low-income household can pay for rent with allocations for utilities and what the rents are in our local market, is roughly $386 a month. And what this tells us is that more than 34% of Los Gatos renters are overpaying for housing. Now, looking at home ownership, we have, again, another significant affordability gap. In 2008, the median single-family home was $1 million. And the median multifamily home, 5 units or more, was $597,000. The maximum affordable housing cost for a moderate income, 4-person household is roughly $3,100 a month, which would equate to approximately a $400,000 home. Our affordability gap for single family is $600,000, and for multifamily is $197,000. One of the other issues we look at in the housing element is the constraints on production of affordable housing. We have governmental constraints and we have non-governmental constraints. On the governmental constraints side, our primary issue is our conditional use permit process requirements for multifamily homes in the multifamily zone. We also have constraints for transitional and supportive housing because we do not recognize those in our town code. We do have action items to address those, however. In terms of non-governmental constraints, land costs are the predominant ones, and those are ones that we really don't have a lot of control over. So in addition to our continued implementation of our successful housing programs that we've implemented over this last couple of housing element cycles, the new programs we're going to be looking at is working with our redevelopment agency to develop housing for extremely low income households. We're going to encourage a mix of mixed-use developments with affordable housing in those areas that are appropriate for that, creating development standards and amend the code to allow emergency shelters in the controlled manufacturing zone, preparing and adopting a reasonable accommodation ordinance to ensure fair access to housing, adding transitional housing and group home definitions to the code. We're also going to be evaluating the town code and determine whether we should amend it to remove the use permit requirement for multifamily homes in multifamily zones. We're going to encourage green building and energy conservation in housing. And the last two are particularly important. We're going to be creating the affordable housing overlay zones that I'll be talking about in just a moment for Oka Road, Vasona Junction area, and Los Gatos Boulevard. And we'll be earmarking our redevelopment funds as well as BMP funds to these sites. Two new action items that we're recommending that were not included in your staff report and not included in the housing element are the implementation of the 2009 affordable housing strategies. Just one that fell off our plate and should be in there, so we're adding a new action item for that. You'll have a schedule and funding allocation plan with that. And another one is to survey shared equity housing programs for possible implementation in Los Gatos. Why shared equity programs? Well, there's a couple of really important reasons. First off, when a homeowner is sharing in the equity, there's a lot more investment in that property, personal investment, and therefore we'll see revitalization of those areas rather than people moving into those areas and kind of being forever renters of what it ends up being. Most importantly, though, our redevelopment agency will ultimately terminate, and our redevelopment funds will ultimately terminate. This could provide a permanent source of affordable housing funding. We don't know a lot about that. We're going to learn about that and present that to you because we're including that as an action item. Let's talk for just a minute about our affordable housing overlay zone. As I indicated, the state requires that we plan for our fair share of the region's housing needs. When we contemplated on how to do that, we looked at should we look at rezoning residential, commercial, and industrial properties to the minimum 20 units per acre to accommodate higher density multifamily, or should we just identify enough property with existing zoning that would accommodate the 521 units that we need to construct? When we went through that first exercise, we came up with around 70 to 100 acres of land, depending on which type of methodology you utilized. So instead, we came up with a relatively new concept that predominantly built-out communities are using, and it's called an Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, or AHOZ. We're designated for sites that are appropriate for housing. It will allow property owners to develop under existing zoning or the AHOZ. The densities will be increased from the existing base zoning if a defined level of affordability is achieved. Incentives for developing these affordable sites would be something similar to deferral of processing fees, building fees, planning fees, and also to dedicate our RDA and our BMP funds. We're going to be working with if the housing element is approved, we'll be working with the GPC to actually define the three different AHOZ areas that we've identified. Just to give you an idea, so this took us from 70 to 100 acres of land that we would have to look at to 34.3 acres. And that's actually to accommodate more than our arena. It would accommodate up to 611 units. Why did we do that? We did that so that in case some of the properties develop at lesser densities, we can still cover our arena. So we looked at all the sites on this analysis, the old courthouse site, South Bay site, Oka Road, Swanson Ford, South Bay Honda, and Ditto's Lane. So looking back on our housing element, we do have needs. We have a senior population. It's a growing segment of our population that wants to age in place. We've heard very clearly they want to age in place. We have a fairly significant, extremely low income and persons with disability. As you see, we have an affordability gap, both for rental properties as well as for owner-occupied. And if the projections from ABAG are correct, we will have an unbalanced job-to-housing ratio. So who needs this type of housing? Pretty much everyone in the community. It's service workers, it's teachers, it's middle-income professionals, children of longtime Los Gatos residents. We talked about our constraints to housing, predominantly land costs, which we have no control over, but also requirements for the conditional use permit in multifamily zones. So how are we going to meet these challenges? We talked about the variety of existing programs and proposed programs, but most importantly, it's implementation of the AHOZ that will allow the town to plan for housing while not requiring extensive rezoning. So we just wanted to go ahead and put the slide back up, which is the next slide, Joe. You just pull it back up, and that again is the format that we're recommending for tonight. We have our consultants as well as town staff to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rooney, and I thank you for being brisk and giving us a nice, quick overview. So Council and Commission, this is an opportunity to ask any preliminary questions of staff before we open it to public comment. We'll start at this end and work our way down with Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question for Wendy or Mr. Early, whomever, what determines fair share?
You may have seen me smile at that question because I don't know if anyone really has a good answer to it. It is fair share is a term of art that's used statewide for this process of allocating housing units from the state to the region and then to the individual cities. The process that's used in every region is different from region to region. There are some broad parameters that are prescribed by the state, and then the region sets its own exact parameters, and that process has been different every time that ABAG has done that process here in this region. The parameters that ABAG used most recently have to do primarily with the amount of development that the city already has, the available land supply within the city, and the plan for both future housing units and jobs that that particular city has, and through a very complicated formula that's intended to fairly allocate the units from one community to the next. Almost every community feels that the process is unfair and that it gave that particular community too many housing units, but the housing units do have to be allocated somewhere, and this is a process that has achieved regional consensus given that the housing units have to be allocated somewhere. It's the process that the region as a whole was able to agree on.
And if I may follow up.
Certainly.
Thank you. When you say the region as a whole was able to agree on, ABAG agreed on behalf of the region?
ABAG is in charge of making that allocation, so ABAG's board of directors, which just consists of elected officials from the 9 counties and the 100 cities in the Bay Area, ultimately voted to accept those RHNA allocations. Okay. They were put together by staff, but then approved by the ABAG board.
Thank you.
Any other questions to my left? Mr. Machichi?
Your chart on regional housing needs allocation for us, over what period of time were those homes built? The 41 homes that stated there?
They've been built since 2007.
So
2007 to 2010.
And what period of time are we supposed to meet this goal of 562?
By 2014.
Thank you.
Any other questions to my left? Looking to my right. Any other questions? Mr. Bourgeois.
Thank you. So we're proposing, 611, and our requirement is 521. How does that work moving forward in the next housing element when we get a new allocation number? Are we offering up units that are then off the table in our next submittal?
We actually asked that question ourselves. We weren't quite sure of that, and we were told by State Housing and Community Development that we will be able to reuse the sites that have not been developed under housing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions to my right, Ms. Sayak?
Thank you, and I do have two questions, if it's okay. The first is specific to the job, I believe it's the jobs to household ratio. I assume that's just, it's specific 1.5 to Los Gatos. And there's discussion about that may increase to 1.6. How do we determine what the ideal is so that, do we want to maintain 1.5? Is it preferable to go up to a 2.0? How does one determine that?
Actually, ideal is 1 to 1.5. So our preference would be to try to maintain no more than 1.5 or less than. So by having it increase to 1.6, it starts to put us out of balance, and therefore potentially resulting in an increased demand for housing.
And as a follow-up to that, is that just based on the demographics of the city, how that's determined? Or is it just a general idea based on communities within the area?
No, it's actually, ABAG goes through a very complicated demographic process of being able to project jobs based upon vacant land, projected on what types of employment they foresee coming into your area. So, and then they also look at vacant land, underutilized land that could be redeveloped, and they make their projections based on that. They come out with projections every 2 years.
I see. Okay. And then my second question, I understand we're looking at the physical housing, but looking at the numbers of people that may come in once they're housed, when do we then look at the services that these different economic groups will require? Is that in a different element, or do we not even consider it as part of this study?
In looking at services, we would have looked at services. The housing element was also included in the general plan environmental impact report. And so from one perspective, you could say that we looked at ability to provide services to those future residents through the environmental impact report. That's on a very global level. It's on a high level. And then when each project comes through, we'll look at the ability to maintain our general plan policies relative to that, as well as to provide services. We have many general plan policies that require ensuring that there are minimal or not desired levels of service. Everything from levels of service for traffic to ensuring that we have adequate levels of public safety. So we look at that individually if projects come through, but if you want to say from the global standpoint, it was looked at in the environmental impact report.
Mrs. Spector. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, a follow-up question to Mariko. I don't remember, when we did the EIR, were the numbers we used the numbers under the overlay zone, or was it the underlying zone?
I got it. I think I got it. Okay. I believe that they take into account the overlay zone. So it actually is very close to, in the housing sites inventory, that table that you see in that chapter, that total number.
So, for example, in the EIR, when we were evaluating school capacity, we would be looking at all of the potential sites with an AHOZ?
Yes, and this is because we're looking at that maximum, that conservative estimate for the environment.
I actually can echo that, because I remember when we had to remove the Bentley site because it was continued as an automobile dealership. We actually could not just add in another site arbitrarily because we'd already completed the traffic analysis, and so that's when we defaulted to the North 40 site, knowing that we would have additional housing units there that were studied. So each of those sites were actually studied for those numbers in the zone.
Other questions? Mr. Brzezinski.
Yes, I wonder if you can clarify the offset between the RENA number and I think it was Phil's question related to what our projection is, what we have to build by 2014. It's not what we have to build by 2014, it's what we have to have available to build by 2014. So would you please
Thank you. That's a
emphasize
very important distinction. As I indicated, the RENA is a planning goal. We have to ensure that we have zoned appropriately, that we have infrastructure in place to support the development of housing. That is the town's obligation. At that point, housing production becomes a private sector enterprise. So the numbers that we are planning for are 521 units. The numbers that have been constructed already are 41. However, the numbers we need to plan for are 521. Towns that or municipalities that have redevelopment agencies will participate in that. They may partner with the private sector, but it's predominantly a private sector enterprise to build housing.
Other questions? Mr. Erickson?
This is a follow-up question to Mariko. So if I understood Wendy correctly, so to get to the 1 to 1.5 ratio, so we established the projected number of jobs first, is that right? And then derive the housing units from that. Is that?
It is an ABAG process, but what I understand is that they ascertain, well, they project housing growth and they project job growth. So they take our existing numbers, probably based on census, and then project housing growth and job growth, and then do the math to come up with your projections.
I could add a little on that just to clarify. There are actually 3 numbers in play here, and 2 of them are the same. So ABAG says, and I think it makes sense, that the average desired ratio would be 1.5 jobs per housing unit, and that's because we know that in about half the households you have 2 adults who work, and about half you have 1 who works. So that's your goal. The second number is that it just so happens, thankfully, that Los Gatos today has about that same ratio, about 1.5 jobs per household. And that's based on actual counts done by ABAG. Third, ABAG projects that by the year 2020, is it 2020 or 2028? You're going at 2020, you will have added more jobs than housing units, and you will get to about 1.6, which is less desirable. And those are based on ABAG's projections of trends. So your adoption of this housing element with additional housing sites in it might help to change that trend and put you back on track to move to get to 1.5 or to stay at 1.5 instead of moving to 1.6.
Mr. Erickson, you
Doesn't look like I helped very much.
I guess I don't want to get in. I don't want to. I guess I was also concerned about Mariko's question, because I was going to actually ask the same question about the services that are derived then from housing. So it seems to me what order you enter those different elements into the equation, because if they're doing the housing and jobs together, and then the additional housing generates service needs sometimes generate jobs. So the fact that you built certain type of housing to respond to that generates a number of jobs, which then throws you back out of balance. Then you try to, so I don't want to get up into a methodology question, but it seems like a very tricky kind of thing to figure out how you would achieve that goal.
I hadn't understood that question. Let me say just very briefly that the number of housing units we're talking about does not generate a tremendous number of secondary jobs to serve it. I mean, we're looking at 500 or 1,000 additional housing units. Those support a tenth of a supermarket, for instance. So you're not looking at any number of, you might be looking at 10 or 20 jobs literally that directly serve that additional increment of housing. So relatively small portion of the overall job supply in the community.
Yeah, I guess, again, I don't know. But depending upon what type of, what particular specialized population that you are serving with those additional houses, and if we have deficiencies with populations that have specialized needs, the service requirements will be larger for those specialized needs, which then will bring services in. So I think we need to be sensitive to what particular specialized populations we're adding the housing for, and I think that's where our deficiencies are to the extent that I understand. So it may generate more than the average number of service requirements if some use some macro level that then might throw that kind of equation out of balance.
I'm assuming, Mr. Erickson, you'd be talking about something like a life care facility, where for every resident that you are housing, you are also employing 2, 3, 4, 5 people in some kind of care position, right? Yeah. Okay. Other questions, Mrs. Spector?
Thank you. Following up sort of on what the people have been asking about, when the projections, when comparing the number of jobs versus the number of homes, the 1.0, 1.5, 1.6, when that assessment or evaluation is made, what, if any, consideration was given to what was previously stated about a growing senior population, which could very well have 2 non-working folks at home as opposed to 2 working or 1.5 working? How was that folded into the evaluation?
That number, I think it's fair to say, is not directly folded in here. As the population ages and fewer people as a percentage work, then you actually want fewer jobs per household. So that target goal of 1.5 might ultimately go down to 1.4 or 1.3. ABEG doesn't project that we're going there right away, but certainly moving towards a higher number of jobs per household is counterproductive relative to the fact, as you say, that more and more people are living in households in which no one is working. So if you see that trend continuing, you want to not go towards a higher number of jobs per household. You want to go down towards a lower number of jobs per household.
Other questions? Oh, good. I have one for you. So can we talk a little bit about this overlay zone and the phrase "allow as of right"? And in particular, my question or concern is on an area that is commercial, and if the overlay zone is applied to that, how much ability do we lose to protect commercial property and not lose it to housing?
When we did the housing sites analysis, we did look at a number of sites, as you can see from the chart. I'm not sure if we want to go back to the chart, but 3 of the sites are actually commercial. South Bay Development, Swanson, and South Bay Honda, former South Bay Honda site. We actually projected a percentage of the site for housing and a percentage for commercial. So we assumed, and do you remember offhand what our assumptions were? I want to say it was somewhere around 50-50. So 50% of those mixed-use sites we projected for housing and 50% we projected for commercial.
Okay, but my question is, as we approve the overlay zone tool, once we apply that, does that allow then the owners of those properties to determine whether they want to stay as commercial, or do they, as of right, be able to convert it over to housing? And perhaps this is an attorney question, or maybe not.
I think I can answer.
Okay.
The next step in this process will be to craft the actual language for each of the affordable housing overlay zones. And let's look at Los Gatos Boulevard, since that's where the predominant commercial zoning is located. We would actually identify in the overlay zone exactly what our expectations, meaning the town's expectations for those sites are. If the developer chose to develop it under the overlay zone, they would have to meet those expectations, or they would have to develop it under their existing zoning. So if we, for instance, let's say we do an analysis of our vacant and underutilized lands, and we realize that we really need a greater percentage of commercial to accommodate other general plan goals and policies, we might indicate that we're looking at more of a 25-75, so 25% housing, 75% commercial. That would then become the language in the affordable housing overlay zone for that area. The developer would be allowed to develop by right if they met that, and if they did not meet that, they would then have to develop under their existing zoning. I hope that answers that.
Perhaps. And what would be the timing on all of that? Because we have active applications that are coming along pretty quick on these.
And that's been the struggle in this, because this housing element has taken us some time to complete. So we are looking at probably about a 3 to 4 month period working with the general plan committee to craft that language for those sites, recognizing some of these sites, South Bay Honda in particular, probably will be developing as it's already proposed, or as we already have a conceptual application in for. So some of these dittos is another example. We're not even going to really do an overlay for that, because I think that development will probably be before the Plan Commission and Council before we even finish the overlay zones. So we're recognizing that. That's why, again, we ended up with 611 units rather than 521 because of these types of situations.
Okay. Any other questions before we open this for public comment? Mrs. Sack.
So then, the owners of these sites, are they aware of the potential changes that may be arising? I understand that they have a choice of which, but it could affect future development, and so I'm curious to know if they are aware that things may change.
I would say yes and no. I think some of the sites are definitely aware. I know, obviously, Dittos, we have control over that. South Bay Honda's aware of it. Swanson Ford's aware of it. Oka Road is also aware of it. South Bay's probably the one I don't know, if South Bay Development. And then Los Gatos Courthouse, we've been meeting with the county talking about that because they are in the process right now surplusing the land. So I'd say all but probably one.
Mr. Rice?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the question the mayor asked, because this whole rights thing is what troubled me as well. And let's say that we get all the language and we carve out a piece of some of these commercial properties and like, does that right extend to a 20 unit per acre count, or can we still keep control of that if that's not what we want on those pieces?
As we remember, the goal of our housing element is to try to provide for affordable housing for the community. If we meet what's called the default density, which is 20 units per acre, the state considers that affordable by design because of the densities. So we're striving to try to achieve 20 units per acre, understanding, however, if you have a 5-acre site, you're allowing 2.5 acres to be developed as commercial and 2.5 as residential. Your housing count then would be on the 2.5 acres. So we would then perceive 20 gross, we're talking gross numbers here, gross 20 units per acre on 2.5 acres.
So my question is does that become a right for the property owner to take that 2.5 acres and put 50 units there?
It does. It conceivably. I mean, you have to factor more into it. The gross density would be 20 units per acre. That would be the gross density. And it depends on site constraints and things like that to how many units they could achieve. But by right, does that give them the ability to develop at those densities that percentage of property.
Okay, so do we have any other questions? I'd like to open this for public comment and get that portion done with, if we can. So can we open it for public comment? I have no card. Anyone in our audience want to speak on this? All right. Public comment is now closed. So, so now we'll move to the opportunity for us to determine what information we need as this goes along. And I'm going to come back to the same issue that Mr. Rice and I have been talking about. At what point in the process do the concerns that we have about the overlay zone and what it allows and what is applied to come up? Is it when we are reviewing the housing element, or is it later after the General Plan Committee does its work, or is it in both cases?
The process would be if, let's hypothetically say this housing element is adopted by the town council, probably starting at the first of the year, staff would be working at the General Plan Committee to look at all 3 sites and identify the parameters for those sites, which would include percentage of those sites being dedicated to housing, percentage dedicated to commercial. Once we complete that, we'd take it through the regular review process with the Planning Commission onto the Town Council. So in essence, in the approval of the housing element, you're approving the concept. There's very little details, as you know, in the housing element on the affordable housing overlay, other than we will dedicate funding to the sites through our redevelopment funds and our BMP funds, and we will consider some waivers or postponement deferrals of fees. That's the only details that we've included in the housing element. So that is going to be a town discretion over how those sites develop. And again, I'd say probably by the time it gets back to council, 5 to 6 months.
Okay. So other questions or requests for information? I'm looking to my right this time. Mrs. Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is regarding the 2 additional proposed programs that were part of your presentation that I guess none of the committees had seen or looked at. So when would we expect to see more information regarding the proposals and how you would perceive that they were going to work?
Well, one is the affordable housing strategies that the council has approved already. They approved in 2009, so we assume the council's in agreement with those, and we just include that as an action item, that we would develop the schedule for implementation of that. The other one is an unknown because it's something that we're not even that well vested in knowing the details of. So we're including it as an action item to study, to bring back a study to the planning, probably GPC, Planning Commission, and the council for approval. Or for consideration, I should say.
Mrs. Jensen?
As a follow-up. If I understand you then correctly, these 2 things would be included as an action item in the proposed housing development, and then details, as with the overlay zone, would be established later?
With the General Plan Committee, yes.
Vice Mayor?
I believe Marcia asked my question.
Okay.
We're referring to the shared equity housing program?
Inclusionary housing.
Okay, that was the question of clarification I was curious about.
Mr. Bourgeois.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the mayor's questions kind of about process. Now, assuming the housing element gets approved and the affordable housing overlay zones are developed and approved, what then would be the process? Say a developer acquires one of these properties and wants to develop under the overlay zone, and the only way, because of site constraints, to meet that 20 units per acre is to put in 5 stories. I mean, what sort of discretion then do we have, given our other policies, to shape that project?
The General Plan Committee actually talked about a couple of different potential methodologies, if you want to say. We talked about we could add a lot of detail to the affordable housing overlay zones, to each of the zones, that would actually dictate everything as up to height of buildings, setbacks, and things like that. There was discussion on whether we should really look at the character of the existing neighborhood. There's some discussion that maybe sometimes we want to look beyond that existing neighborhood because maybe we want to start to change that character. So we would envision, though, that process, how that should look, what it should feel like, would be part of the affordable housing overlay zone information. So it would be worked through the General Plan Committee and then on the Planning Commission and Council. I would advocate for it to be part of that because one of the key goals of a housing element is to remove uncertainty. And so that's why we would want to have as much information in there as possible to remove uncertainty for potential development.
If I could, I want to make sure that no misinformation would get on the record. There's absolutely no reason one would need to build 5-story buildings under any circumstance to get to 20 units per acre. You should be able to accommodate it very comfortably in a 2 or perhaps a few 3-story portions of a primarily 2-story building. These are essentially townhouses. All of these sites are, particularly the 3 where we're looking at that overlay zone, are quite flat. We have netted out small amounts of acreage and only multiplied 20 times the net acreage to be sure that we've eliminated any constrained portions of the sites. But we're looking at very developable land and probably almost completely 2-story buildings to get to a 20 unit per acre density.
Great, thank you for that.
If I could just add also, 20 units per acre, by the way, is our existing high-density residential. So just so people understand, this is not something beyond what our town code already allows.
Other clarifications or requests for additional information? Mr. Machichi.
Related to that number, I noticed, thank you very much. They always do that for me. My age, I keep
I'm happy to do that.
The residential site analysis, I think you indicated using 20 per net acre. Now, do you consider the 20% BMPs that have to be part of that?
No.
So your number really is 20% higher?
It could be up to 20% higher, yes. And just for, sometimes we say these things with thinking everybody understands that. As I think the Council and Planning Commission know, our existing
That's why
Our existing density bonus program allows for up to 100% of the affordable units on site as a density bonus, and it's not counted in the overall density. So we are proposing to continue with that same program.
Mrs. Talsworth. To switch it over to another subject for just a minute. I was taken by the, on page 10 under the homeless persons, and my question is related to incorporate new provisions into our housing element about that. And where would we be seeing those at some point, or can you tell us what they are, or did I not read it, or?
I'm sorry, which you're referring to page 10 of?
Well, it's page 11, actually. It's under homeless persons.
Of the housing element?
Yes. And it says, based on recent updates to the state law, local jurisdictions are required to address. I'm not going to read the whole thing, blah, blah, blah. It's the top of page 11, second paragraph.
So
it just says within 1 year of the adoption of the housing element to incorporate these new provisions. And I was curious as to what those were. Are they different than we have now?
If you give us just a moment.
Sure, thank you.
While Agnes is looking that up, I'm going to speculate, which can get you in trouble. But one thing will be the doing the zoning code amendment to allow for the shelter in the controlled manufacturing zone. So that's one. We're going to continue with the county continuum of care program, which is a regional effort of providing services and homes for homelessness. And what else do we have? And also the code amendments we have to change the definition of family, which currently defines family as related by blood. When we'll have to change that to becoming compliant with fair housing, which removes that requirement and allows then for group homes and things like that to accommodate transitional housing and to accommodate all types of housing needs, including the homeless.
It wasn't stated, so I was curious as to what those provisions were. Thank you.
I'll throw in one of my, actually it's the only one, I don't want to scare you, I have a big long list here, but the very low income numbers, I would be curious if it's in any way possible to know how many of those are seniors, because my gut feeling is that we have a lot of seniors who are sitting on equity in a long lived-in home, and yet they probably are in the very low income category. And I think it makes a difference in how we look at how we solve the issue of very low income if we can know more about them. So not just how many are seniors, but as much information as we could get about the demographic profile of that group would be very helpful for me as we go through the process. Any other requests for information or clarification? Ms. Siak.
This is my last, I guess it's a comment that just occurred to me looking at the residential site analysis. 2 of the sites that have been identified are on Los Gatos Boulevard, and council must have heard the commission at many times talk about the future development of Los Gatos Boulevard. And so I know I've asked it a million times, but I'm wondering if once those affordable overlays come in so many ways that can dictate the character of Los Gatos Boulevard as those overlays get developed. And so I'm wondering is there a parallel discussion on what the overall boulevard will look like so that these 2 overlays would not in the future conflict with what the overall character would be. So it's a very process-oriented question.
What we would be doing now, because we plan to relook at the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, as the Council and Planning Commission are aware. It's not on our immediate work plan, but it is on our work plan. Given the timing of this, we would be using the policies, though, in the existing Los Gatos Boulevard plan. We'd also look at direction that was given approximately 2 years ago from the council to staff on the update for Los Gatos Boulevard plan. So we'd look at both of those, that direction as well as the existing document. And then anything, and I don't think in terms of timing this would work, but anything that comes out of the North 40 planning process that could also dictate the look of Los Gatos Boulevard. We would use all of that as we looked at these different sites. But at this point in time, we really have just the two directions. We have the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, and we have the direction from council from about 2 years ago.
And Wendy, maybe you could clarify, I know that at least one of those two sites on Los Gatos Boulevard already has an application pending and would not have actually an AHOZ prepared for it.
Right, the Swanson Ford site actually has an active application, and then the South Bay Honda site has a conceptual application. So they may end up being developed before, or it may end up being approved or reviewed prior to developing the affordable housing overlay zone.
So those sites will still count towards your housing element if they're developed with some housing, and they may never need the AHOZ developed for them because the applications will proceed before the AHOZ can even be done.
Sack? So then a follow-up question is, if we don't meet the residential numbers that we're projecting on these because the applications come beforehand, will we then have to then look at the other sites and try and bump up those numbers, or do we give enough allowance?
We've done two things. First off, we've come up with enough allowance. We also, one thing that's not counted in here, and we believe if the property is developed, we'll have at least 20% of the units for affordable housing is the North 40 site. And then lastly, we do have an action item in the housing element that does direct us if some of these sites do not develop with affordable housing or some percentage of affordable housing, that we do look at other sites. And when we started this analysis in the first place, we had many other sites on Oka Road that we had identified, and we started removing those sites because we were able to meet the numbers with the minimum amount possible. So we'd probably go back and look at those sites.
Mr. Wasserman?
Thank you. And on that same residential site analysis grid that you have, the Swanson Ford property, which you mentioned, Wendy, already in play, that's the reason you're showing development potential of 57 instead of 90, which would be 20 homes per acre. All the rest I see are a 20-to-1 ratio. But that 57 is reflective of the plans being considered, correct?
That was actually the plan that was being considered when we were working on this. They've actually reduced those numbers down somewhat, even more so. But yes, you're correct.
Okay, but the rest of them I see are 20-to-1 ratios. But when you come to the 611 projected from these properties, and I heard you mention North 40 as still another potential, the 521 is the number that we're supposed to be looking at?
That's correct.
And we have 41 of those done that count towards that?
It's actually 562.
Oh, so you subtracted the 41 already to get to 521.
That gives us 521.
Thank you. That's what I was asking about.
I thought the best line in all of your slides was something like, this is a goal, not a quota. And that's so good to keep in front of us because we can get wrapped up in these numbers and start to panic, I think. And, we're just identifying opportunities and not.
Yep.
I see no further hands. Does staff have what you need from us this evening?
Well, it sounds like we have one follow-up item, and we will try to, and we do have a couple of others, as you know from the staff report. We had a couple of others still from the General Plan Committee that we need to follow up with. So we probably have about 5 follow-up items that we need to accomplish over the next week and a half. And we also request, please continue to contact us and send us more requests if you have any more. Our goal truly is to be able to get to the October 27th Planning Commission meeting with this information and to facilitate any further discussion and then try to secure a recommendation to the council. And then we'll be at the council on November 1st, which is actually 2 weeks from today, trying to secure adoption of this document. We thank you for your time.
And I thank you, Planning Commission, for joining us this evening, and we are adjourned.